Hi folks, Doc here. As per usual, I don't have enough free time, and when I do manage to come up with a little bit of free time, I wind up working on something that I didn't intend to work on, and not working on stuff that I should. And what I should do is a brake job on my Trailblazer, and a new muffler on my Sprinter. I'll get to it. Meantime, back at the farm, the weather is rapidly improving here in Ontario, and I've been working hard to get Fugazi, not necessarily done, but at least into a position where when the phone rings and one of my buddies says, we're going on a wrap, at least it's ready enough for that. So there's been something that's been bothering me for a while on this thing. I put some thought into it. Today I've got the problem solved. I'm going to show you what I've done. Alrighty then, so with those big fat juicy ITP mud lights out back, I've got quite a bit of exposed tire, and that's going to be flinging crap all over the place, which is all fine and good, except I don't really want to eat it. It's one thing for me to fling mud, it's another thing for me to fling mud all over myself, and I'm not too interested in doing that. So, it's time for some mud guards or fender flares. Walking over this side of the machine, you can see that I've already done one side. I'm going to show you how to do the other side. And what I did was pretty easy to do, and it was relatively inexpensive, free if you're resourceful, and I believe it's a pretty good solution. The material I used is super tough, nice and flexible, easy to get your hands on, pretty easy to cut too. And what this is, it's a mud flap for a tractor trailer, and you know, it kind of goes without saying, but one mud flap was more than enough material to do a tractor both sides. The mud flap that I got was 24 by 36, and you can actually do this with a 24 by 24, but since I didn't have any floating around, I bought one for cheap at Princess Auto, and there was just a couple dollars difference between the 24-inch and the 36-inch long, so I figured I'd rather have some extra material than not enough. And you can see where I've cut out for the one side, a rough cut, and then I traced the other side on there with a black marker, so it's pretty hard to see, but that's okay. We'll go into some more detail. You've got some options when it comes to your choice of materials for this job here. I went with the tractor trailer mud flap for a number of reasons, and partially because it was just a blank canvas. I could play with the width, you know, I could shape it, I could play with it, and it had good coverage. I'll get to the coverage thing in a minute, but here's some of the other options that I have explored in the past, and I'm going to present to you anyways. Top of the heap, and you've seen guys do this already, is this plastic garden edging stuff. And you know, when you have a garden that borders on a lawn, you use this to make the difference between the two, so the one doesn't just blend and grow into the other. And this is a reasonably flexible plastic. I first did this on mule in its original incarnation, and the thing that I didn't like is after a while the UV got to it, and in the colder weather it would crack on me. Some of them have this extra lip here, some of them don't. It's got this nice beaded rim here, which is cool for, you know, for outside. But I didn't like how durable it wasn't, and it didn't give me as much coverage as I wanted. Option number two that I changed to on mule that seemed a little bit better for me is this vinyl Cove base, and this is about 4 inches. It's about the same width as the garden edging, and this stuff here is used for baseboard in commercial institutions, and it's a vinyl rubber, and again, it's fairly flexible, it's fairly strong, it's easy to work with, and it can be had fairly cheap. And I say fairly cheap because nothing beats a free option when it comes to pricing. But again, you know, this can be laid on there and used, but I didn't get the coverage I liked. Option number three, and I've seen this one float around before. I've played with the idea, I've used this for many things, but I haven't used it for fender flares, is tire tread. And all I did was I hacked up a turf tire in the process of experimenting, and sure enough, this can be used. And and this was a 6-inch wide turf tire, 6 or 6.5. And I could use this to get the coverage I desired, and obviously it's very strong and durable and flexible, and it'll stand up to anything. A little bit heavier, but you know, sometimes you gotta pay for durability with a little weight. The problem that I found is I didn't really like the tread patterns I had kicking around, silly as it sounds. I've got a bunch of tires floating around, didn't like the way any of them were looking. I cut this one up as a tester. And it's very workable, it's very doable, and if you're on an ultra tight budget, just go ahead and hack up a tire. It will work. With a very sharp utility blade, it's not as hard to cut as you might think. So I cut it away from the sidewall first, and then I sliced it open, and there you go, you got something to work with. I've decided that I wanted about 5 inches of coverage, which comes to about here. It doesn't completely cover the whole tire. I didn't want this whole skirt thing going on. I just wanted sufficient coverage that was going to save me from most of the mud. So your step 1 is determining a material, and your step 2 is determining your coverage. We're past that. Now I'm going to take the wheel off, and I'll show you how to prep the fender for installation. Okay. So step 1 here is we've got to create a flange for the fender flare to sit on, because you can't really bolt this here. That's not going to work. It's just going to drop and drag on the tire. So we need to change surfaces by 90 degrees. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a flange out of the existing fender and bend it, and for that we need to decide how much we're going to bend up, and I decided that about 1 inch would be sufficient to hold the fender flare, and we'll buy a little more clearance for the tire too. So what I've done is I've got a caliper here, otherwise known as a divider, and I've set it to 1 inch, and all I'm going to do is trace the pattern and follow the existing fender opening at 1 inch. And at the bottom here, I'm just going to carry the line right down to a point. I'm going to carry that around back to where I want it to stop, which I determined on the one side was about 3.5 inches from where I cut out for the toolbox. I'm going to create a little bit of a vertical line there at 3.5 inches. Just scoring the paint here. Now, trying to bend this big, long, curved surface is going to be near enough impossible, so we're going to make a bunch of relief cuts in it, effectively creating tabs. Grinder time. Now, all I'm going to do is take my grinder, and I'm going to cut slots in up to the line, about 1 inch or so apart, all the way along. And, of course, that final cut there, which is where it's going to stop. Now, this is best done with your cuts at about 90 degrees of the line. So as you're coming around the curve and going down, you're not going to keep cutting dead vertical. You're going to turn your grinder and cut at 90 degrees to the line. Okay, so now that we've finished making the cuts, we're going to bend these to 90 degrees to give us a flange to work with. Now, there's 2 ways to do this, and I put a fair bit of thought into both. Actually, when I did the first side, I did it one way and changed my mind and bent them all out the other way. If you bend the tabs inward, then what'll happen is your fasteners, your screws or rivets or whatever you use, will not be visible, and that's a bit of a bonus. The downside to that, and the reason that I did not do that, is if you bend the tabs inside, then what you wind up with is a 1 inch flange all up inside the fender there, where all kinds of mud and crap is going to get trapped, and that's not going to do anybody good. At the very least, it's going to lead to some rust. So we're going to bend them out. Your other determining factor is this. If you bend the tabs up inside, then you can have a really wide piece of material, and it doesn't matter. You've got room to move it in and out. and the excess doesn't really matter. No matter what you do, it's going to fit the profile of the fender. The fender comes out, it's okay, goes in, it's okay. It's going to cover no matter what. That's the benefit to having the tabs up inside. On the outside, and this is going to be just about impossible to shoot on camera, but a dead straight edge is going to take a little bit of work. So you may end up with a bit of an uneven gap on top here. You know, if you've got a flexible material, you can help close that gap as you're screwing it down. I ended up with a little bit of an uneven gap, especially on the other side, because I've actually got a dent in the fender. But I'll show you how I'm going to just tidy that up after the fact. So in the meantime, it's time to start bending. So all I'm doing here is I'm just going to use a pair of vice grips right up to my marked line. Just going to bend everything up to approximately 90 degrees. You can massage these tabs a little bit later to get the flare to sit the way you want it to sit. But for now, we're just going to get them at least as close as we can by eye anyways. Now would also be a really good time to throw some spray paint around if you want to prevent rust or if you're worried about it. Just, you know, shoot it underneath, shoot it over top, and get in all the bare middle. Now, this is we're at a point where if you're using a wider material like I am, and coming around the back, you need to start taking some measurements to figure out how much material you need. So, starting where I want to start, and wrapping the tape measure around, I figured I needed about 25 inches. I think it actually came to 24 and a half. But I'm on camera, so I'm not taking the careful measurements. And I figured I wanted about 5 inches of coverage, which comes to here. Just get that laid out in there. Oh, look, the asshole dog is barking next door. And then to go where I wanted to go, that brought it to about 10 inches. So obviously if I cut the piece at 5 inches all the way along, I'm going to wind up with a gap here, and I got to fill it in with another piece of material, and I'm, you know, not about to do that. So what I would need to do is cut a strip that's 25 by 10 and then trim it to shape. Now I'll spare you all the measurements that I did. You can use a paper or cardboard template, but I basically figured out this radius here so I could get a nice wrap around it without a big square gap. And I figured out a radius here for visual interest, and I marked it out on my mud flap. Now obviously I've already done the one side, and then just to make life easier I flipped it over and traced it for the other side, but I'll show you what I got there. Now I have absolutely no idea if you can see these lines here on camera, but I used a black dry erase marker, and that way any lines that exist on the thing when I'm done I can just simply wipe off again. But with a nice sharp utility knife, this stuff cuts pretty well. So I'm just going to cut out on my own lines here. And if your knife is nice and sharp, as mine is, you don't have to kill yourself. You don't have to take multiple passes. It's actually pretty sweet and easy. Come around to the top here to cut out the radius for the footboard end of it. And there you go. Now I'm using these self-drilling screws. They have a drill bit point to them, if you can see that. Except I'm not using them as self-drilling screws. And the reason that I'm not doing that is sometimes things can move around while it's starting to dig in and drill the hole before the screws goes in. And, you know, then things have shifted out of position. That's a bit of a pain in the keister. So I'm going to be using just a 1/8 drill bit just to pilot the holes before I bomb these things in. The dog next door is getting obnoxious. So I'm getting this positioned more or less where I want it, and I'm keeping an eye on where these tabs are. And what I'm going to do is basically I'm going to put one in every second tab. You could put one in every first tab, like in each tab, but that's probably too much. So I'm just going to get an idea of where I can start, and that's right about here. as I'm going along here, I can bend the tabs to get the thing to sit right. I can move it in and out to get it to sit right. So just take your time. Get it the way you want it. Get her done. Alright, so at this point you could even call yourself done and just go ahead and put the tire back on. I am not done. I'm going to change out these sheet metal screws for, well, probably pop rivets. I'll play with it a little bit longer. And another thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take some probably black silicone and just fill in this little bit of a lip right here. You totally don't have to, I just don't want to get a bunch of junk all trapped up in there. So it might be better for me to fill it. The other side's actually worse because of the dent I had in the fender is a little caved in, so there's a bit of an irregular gap here. So I'm probably going to fill that in. But in terms of just the raw task of getting fender flares on your machine, there it is. I've noticed in the past that the self-drilling screws, because of the fact that they drill a hole that's almost the same size as the threads, they have a habit of loosening off over time. These rivets aren't going to do that. If I ever need to take these flares off again, got a little drilling to do, but it's not as bad as you might think. Alrighty then. So aside from the aforementioned silicone, which I don't have at the moment, I'm going to pick up a tube. We're done. Not bad, not bad. Alright, so that covers our DIY fender flare install, and I hope you found it informative and helpful. And I've just about got Fugazi here where I'm ready to take it out and have a little bit of fun. Even though there's a couple of upgrades I still want to do to it, I'm almost there. In the meantime, I did something silly in this video to see who's actually paying attention. The first 3 subscribers that point out what silly thing I did in this video to see if you're paying attention are going to get themselves one of these Sprocket's Garage vinyl graphics sent to them free of charge. So point it out in the comments below. And for everybody else, you can get one of these babies from sulphurcitydesign.com, and the link is going to be in the video description. Thanks for tuning in to Sprocket's Garage and subscribing and sharing the videos, and until next time, take care of yourself.